Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts.
We have a full house here. We're very lucky to have Scott Belsky, who many of you know well, and many of you know, and it needs no introduction. But I'll just for anyone who may not be as familiar, is a prolific angel investor, chief product officer at Adobe, founder of Behance, and also spent some time at Benchmark as a venture partner for a few years. So Scott, by way of introduction, why don't you sort of introduce the beginnings of your angel investment journey, of your angel journey? Some people are pros here. Some people are starting out. You invested in Pinterest, you invested in Uber, you invested in a bunch of others. What were your first few years of angel investing like, and what was your philosophy and learning curve in doing it?
Well, it's really, from a product and founder perspective. So I started Behance back in 2005. We were bootstrapped for about 5 or so years, and we got venture backing at that point. And then after 2 more years, 7 years in, that's when we were acquired by Adobe. But in that last 2 years, after 5 years of doing this, I had met, a group of other product-oriented founders. And then at the time, I had a really good grasp of the design community and the design world, given the role that Behance was playing. And so companies that were either design-driven, their product was design-driven, or they had a design founder, or they were looking to hire great designers, I would try to help my friends out. Ben Silberman asked me to be a product advisor for Pinterest when he was just pivoting from something else into what became known as Pinterest. And so I joined him as a product advisor. And then when he was raising his seed round, which back then he was a $5 million valuation, but which now seems small. But back then, for this small little image-based bookmarking site in the world of Delicious and all these other sites, I was like, I don't know, should I do this? Should I put money in? I shouldn't be investing in anything. I'm the founder and I can barely, make my own salary. But that was my first angel investment, and started working with him and the team on product stuff, and right out of the gate. And then I then started in the New York ecosystem, coming across other entrepreneurs that were friends and helping them either as a product advisor or investor. Another strange, crazy story is that my third investment ever was the second one didn't work out, so we won't talk about that one. The third one, Behance had a big partnership with this company called StumbleUpon, which most of us remember. And Garrett Camp had just bought StumbleUpon back from eBay. He had sold it to eBay, and then he had bought it back. And Behance and StumbleUpon were doing a big partnership together. And he was in my office, which was also my apartment back then, in 2000, and I forget the date, but it was after Pinterest. And he literally whips out a sketch pad and is showing me this side project he's working on to help summon a car. And he's like, do you want to help? And I'm like, dude, you just bought back your company from eBay, and you should be focused and I should be focused. And then, but then I became just someone who would look at his prototypes and help with the early brand of what became Uber. And so that was the process of getting involved with Uber in the early days. So I think that my lesson learned has been, at least for me, I haven't focused on looking for investments for the sake of it as much as following my product compass, and the people and the problems and the products that I have affinity towards has been a good guiding force for me.
If you didn't invest in Pinterest or Uber, you would have had the biggest FOMO ever.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, having been able to be there and not, I wrote a very, very, very tiny check into Uber because, again, I had no idea what the hell was going on. So, but not complaining. And since then it's been just great to work with a ton of different design-oriented founders or products and companies, and now probably almost 100 companies at this point, and then different plays throughout. Sometimes it was direct-to-consumer play. Neil Blumenthal and Dave were they were Warby Parker, but they were New York City entrepreneurs. So I met them through this ecosystem here, and and then early AI companies, this company called Hyperscience, another New York company. So New York has always been, one area where I try to, be especially tuned in. But at this point, it's obviously, both coasts and beyond.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for nearly a decade, maybe more. How would you say you've evolved as you sort of professionalized as an investor a bit? The biggest sort of like principles you've picked up, or as you sort of think about your non-obvious, operating principles as an angel today, what comes to mind?
Well, I think a couple litmus tests, if you will. One to me is with people that I hire and work with, or people that I invest in, is just that idea of every conversation being almost a step function more interesting than the one before it, as opposed to having the same conversation twice. So I like to try to talk to a founder more than once if I can, because that tells me something very quickly. I mean, Periscope was a good example of that. Like Kayvon and Joe, every time we started to jam about what they were calling something else before, Bounty app, was a step function more interesting than the one before it. And the chemistry just felt so good. I was like, I want to be a part of this. I feel like that's such a good signal. Also, seeing how someone thinks through product, is great. It's one thing to see a prototype and click through yourself, but to be walked through and ask questions about why certain decisions were made, I feel like you can unearth so much. And I do believe that every product is ultimately a representation of its team. And I think that even, in my day job now at Adobe, where there's, at least a dozen or so products in my organization, the products themselves almost look like their team. And I don't know if it's like we see a dog and it looks like its owner and we like play that psychological association game that may be bullshit, but I actually do believe that, a product is a manifestation of its team. And so if you can get to know the product alongside the team at the same time, you start to draw some of those connections.
Yeah. One thing that some people are thinking here is where exactly do they fit in as an investor? Are they an operator who angel invests on the side? Do they join or start a firm in some capacity? You've explored that in different contexts with your role at Benchmark. You as an angel, you could have obviously started your own fund. How have you thought about frameworks for thinking about what's the best fit for you, and any advice you give for other people about what makes the most sense in terms of what capacity to become an investor?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, let's talk about it in two different ways. So let's talk about first in terms of the market, where the market's going and what founders want. And then let's talk about it in terms of, us as individuals, and finding our kind of power lane or power alley, so to speak, in terms of what we're especially good at. But in the market, founders want to be surrounded by people that have empathy for what they're going through. They want to be surrounded by people that are maybe less generalists and more superpowers in specific areas. As a founder, there's so many moments where you're lost, where you're facing uncertainty or ambiguity, and you want to have someone specifically who you can contact to walk you through it. And as a founder myself, folks like Chris Dixon, he helped me walk through my cap chart the night before the acquisition and see what equity I might want to shift in various places to make certain people whole. And he had done it himself. And so, that I think that people want to look for that. And, these days when you have all these very large funds that can essentially be valuation agnostic and just get in early as an option for themselves to get in later. And also just the plethora of new funds. I mean, there's just so much capital in the ecosystem, and anyone who doesn't know better will basically invest in anything that has all the right buzzwords. So I think that being an operator investor, is a competitive advantage these days. I've seen it time and time again where a round will be full, but there's always space for that operator with a background in a specific area that's going to be crucial for that company to succeed. So I think that, when I see my friends who are great operators suddenly say, oh, I have to join a fund or I have to start a fund, in some ways, I almost see them as taking themselves off of the market of what they could have been competitive in. Had they just kind of stayed investing in their own name and in very small checks, maybe they would have gotten every piece of deal flow from their community and they would have been able to invest in anything they wanted. And now suddenly they're just making it more competitive for themselves. So for those of you that are operators or are thinking of, investing in your own name, in a spearfishing like manner using your superpower, that's where the greatest opportunity is right now in this space. As for individuals, and what we love doing, I mean, one thing I learned at Benchmark is I don't believe that venture capital is like a very scalable offering. I think that the best firms are boutiques. They're not efficient in certain ways on purpose. As soon as you have someone making the agenda for you in partner meetings, all bets are off as far as I'm concerned, because then you're not leveraging the forces of natural selection to determine what you should actually be talking with your partners. As soon as you're dealing with, operations and talking about the firm's website and all these other mechanics, all bets are off in my view, because you're not focusing enough on what actually moves the needle, which is finding that one great deal and then making that founder succeed. So I think that as individuals, we have to kind of find, the construct that works for us, and the superpower that we bring to the market that no one else has. And also, last thing I would just say is curiosity. It's, whenever I'm not sure whether to work with someone or whether to invest in something or whatever, it's just like, what am I insanely curious about? And if it's something I'm really curious about, it typically ends up being a good learning experience, if nothing more.
And one of the things that I think you learned from our conversation, or that I gathered from our conversations, is that you're more excited about, or you gravitate more towards the pre-momentum than the post-momentum. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, listen, I mean, I've invested in Series A, Series B before, and typically I see it as paying the price for missing it earlier. But also, it's just something that if it's something I really love and it's a team I really love, I'll do it. But I like thinking about the potential of a product and the potential of a team. Whereas I think, great investors, probably way better than I, are more focused on the present, and what's the current state of the team and the current state of the product. And they're probably making a risk-adjusted better bet, than I am. But I just love, that early stage. I think it's so fun.
And how about, because you've incubated a company, you've been an exec at a company, you founded a company. How have you sort of come around just more broadly? Because a lot of people here are also just thinking about, long-term, what they want to do and where they best fit in, where you best fit in, and why being exec at Adobe relative to all the other things you could be doing is the right
thing. It took me years to figure this out, and I learned the hard way. Behance was a 7-year journey, right? And then 3 years at Adobe, leading Behance, but also leading a lot of the transition from Creative Cloud, from software to service. And I had a great time, but everyone was telling me, dude, you should be an investor. You should be an investor. You should be an investor. And then when you have the opportunity to join a firm like Benchmark as a general partner, it's like, I should probably do this. And then immediately, 3 to 6 weeks later, I felt like I'd hung up my spurs. I had felt like I was listening to like Johnny Cash music, and it was just not a good sign, because I was in my 30s and I just felt like I wasn't using my superpowers anymore. So what I realized is that actually having a big team and operating was always stressful. And then as soon as I was no longer doing it, I realized how much of me was, engaged by that. I missed it. So I've come to believe that happiness is feeling fully utilized. And to me, that means, 30% of me feeling utilized with friendships and family, 30% of me feeling utilized with the investing stuff and being able to help teams build products and build businesses. And, the rest of me just building products myself, building teams. I'm not doing a time breakdown. I'm doing more of a happiness breakdown. Feeling fully utilized means using all these muscles in unison. And so that's why, some people might say, oh, that's a little weird of a hybrid, doing this investing thing and also, leading products at a big company. Why would you be doing that? But for some reason, at the end of the day, it makes me feel really fulfilled.
What advice do you have for founders who or people who want to incubate companies and be chairman of them, but aren't the sort of day-to-day CEO based on your experience doing that a few years ago?
Yep. Yeah, sure. And, I studied this, I've tried it, and I thought a lot about it. I'll tell you, watching Garrett with Uber taught me a few things. Number one is you have to be obscenely generous in order to be a co-founder who's non-operating and a board chairman in his case, and truly empower a team to succeed. And I've seen a few examples of this fail where someone says, oh no, I'm going to retain this much equity because it was my idea. And then the company breaks down, in most cases. With Garrett, it was for him all about setting up the right people to succeed. And he knew that having much less ownership of a business that was worth billions would obviously be more valuable than half ownership or whatever of something that was, worth nothing. So I think that you have to have that attitude of knowing that, ideas are worth nothing really. And you can have an idea. And then if you build a founding team around it, be extra generous. And so there's never a doubt that they have that it's theirs and not yours, and then do everything you can to empower and help them succeed. And, that's what I would try to do in that scenario. Incubations are tough because listen, these are living, breathing entities. Companies are like children. They need to feel like they have devoted parents. They need to get all the nourishment and otherwise they'll be screwed up.
Yeah. I've heard from this, someone, I'm actually forgetting his name. He co-founded Long Game with Lindsay Holden. He's co-founded a few companies. He's a professor at Stanford. One of his advice was basically that you have to have like one core value prop that's very hard to replace and sort of justifies. And so maybe it's, you could bring a lot of capital in the case of like Josh Kushner or Keith Raboy, or maybe it's, in his case, he has, relationships with banks that merit sort of that equity because he's getting the first customers and stuff like that. Yeah, it's interesting. Going back to your point around evaluating the market, I'm curious to get your sense for how you think that's going to change in the years to come. Like, for example, do you see the future as like, rounds being put together? It's like one lead firm and then it's all, operator angels. And like, is it sort of a barbell? Are you long the solo capitalist trend? Or how do you sort of think things evolve in the next few years?
Well, there's a couple of companies that I've been a part of recently, their rounds, that are second-time entrepreneurs who are really well respected and known. And they just raised their seed round from individuals only. And usually one individual with a larger check set the terms, and then everyone else just followed. And then for their Series A, they went to meet with a lot of great firms. They got a term sheet from Sequoia, and they met a few others. And they decided, we're just going to do another inside round with the exact same people. And so they came back to us and said, do you want to do a round at a much higher valuation? But others, were really like, there were a number of people that still were able to write very big checks. And so, we continue to do it that way. And I think you're seeing more and more of that, because if you're an experienced entrepreneur, or not to say that firms don't add value, they do. But if you can go to a hand-selected group of people who know you and you know them, and who are capable of writing larger checks, and you don't have to bring on a board member if you don't want to, you have a little more authority. I mean, maybe people will just do that. And so there'll be a positive selection bias, for some of the best companies potentially. And so I do think that being in the position where you can do that, I mean, in this case, funds were basically not even allowed to participate. So you had to almost be an individual angel or a super small solo capitalist type fund to really, I guess, in their eyes, at least be part of this. That's an extreme, and I'm not suggesting that that's the norm, but I do agree with what you kind of postulated, which is that you'll have more situations where one firm leads, and then they'll just round it out with a lot of value-added individuals. And if you're the folks that are going to suffer are the people who don't have a superpower, or maybe just from the finance world, who have a venture capital fund with money, and I call that harmless capital. There's a lot of harmless capital in the system right now. It's just people who will write a check and just, stay out of your way. That there'll be a negative selection bias for those dollars.
How do you think about being a thematic investor or going deep on spaces or getting up to speed on certain things? How do you approach that? And are there certain spaces you're excited about right now? Yeah,
there are. And I mean, I think I go on whims, where I'll get super excited about a certain concept. And right now I'm really interested in this vertically integrated services idea where you essentially, for small businesses. So basically you go out there, you train people to be repair people of, to repair certain types of appliances. And then you set them up as a business in their geography to repair those appliances, and you generate the leads for them, and you process payments for them, and you do marketing and SEO for them, and you do everything for them. So it's almost like the reverse franchise model, where people don't come to you, but you go to them, and you basically build this, and in exchange, you take 7% of their revenue forever. And I've seen this now in a few different spaces, and it's really interesting to me. I'm really interested in this SMB, very like micro SMB trend right now. One company I invest in called Castrop. It's almost like a Shopify, but for super, super simple, like think taco trucks and that kind of thing. And, just cleaning up the space because they have some very novel, no fee ways of doing this that are really interesting. So there are these little themes that I'll pick up on and I'll get obsessed with, and I'll try to meet, the rest of the players in the space. But I try not to ever define myself by a thesis because the thesis is always changing, and they get old quickly.
The company you incubated was in a similar space to the spaces that you're exploring right now, right? So you've been curious about this space for a while. Can you talk about?
Yeah, sure. So this is also, one of those big things that did not work out. So Prefer. The idea of Prefer was to help people get referrals for every service professional in their lives from their friends. And so the idea being that you will trust, if I tell you there's a chef or there's a hairstylist or there's a massage therapist or there's any service provider actually that you would ever need that you might find online with 4.2 stars from strangers, you'll actually potentially irrationally always trust what I have to say over whatever the average online says. We just are, as human behavior, we just always go to friends for the referrals for everything. And when you go to any of the moms groups on Facebook, for example, it's a constant exchange of, oh, I need a babysitter, or I need a tutor, I needed this, I needed that, toilet trainer, whatever the case is. It's all a referral frenzy. But the thing is there's no structured product that helps us know the services that our friends use. And so the idea being that if you showed me all of your service providers and I showed you all of mine, compounded by 50, then we'd have a full index of every service provider fully vetted by our friends that would fuel our lives and our needs for services. And so what ended up happening, I put together a team. I was just a board member, but I put together a great team, and the team explored this. We launched the first version of the product that actually was working extremely well, but had no growth mechanics other than like the manual old school growing it on with a field game. And so the team was also, our CEO, it was from Facebook and from the growth mindset, and so it was very important to the team that they found that kind of like, viral growth mechanic from within the product. So you wouldn't rely on a field, on a ground team. And so, there were like 3 or 4 different pivots off of that. The team, I've shared this publicly, and, the team and I talk about it still quite a bit. My view is that maybe we should have kept at that first iteration more, because it was actually, people still come up to me and are like, I wish I had that back, but it wasn't growing. Like, I wonder if we should have, rather than pivoting off of it, just like kept tweaking the mechanics for get it to become more shareable.
Yeah, it's just hard to know when to change and when to keep going. Your first example of sort of the reverse, what did you call it? Reverse what?
Reverse franchise model.
It's almost like YC for the trades or something. Like, are you? So you see it as education and then sort of job placement or lead generation.
Well, there are a few ways of going about it. Another team that I met is basically going to like painters that are out there that have their own mom and pop painting shops, right? And these painters in geographies all across the country and presumably the world, these painters, they do, they may make 150 to 300, maybe $1 million a year for their like painting business. But they have no payments technology. They don't know what SEO or SEM even means. They definitely don't have a social media presence. They don't have any reminders, CRM management tools for their customer base, no referral engines, like nothing, right? And so if you go to one of these companies and you say, here's the deal, I'm going to turn you into one of my franchises. So basically, I'm going to reverse. You're already an operating company. I'm going to turn you into a franchise of my like parent name. And so instead of Bob's Painting, it's now like XYZ Bob's Painting. And in exchange, I'm going to do all of this back end for you. I'm going to fuel your business, and I'm going to show you that you're going to actually grow 20 to 25% based on what I'm going to do for you. And I'm going to take 7% revenue going forward. Then it's a good value proposition for everyone. And so that's one model. Another model is to actually go and find these people and train them up and then basically light them up on your platform as a business from day one, but you having like trained them to do the craft as opposed to them having already done it.
One company we co-invested in together a bunch of years ago was Greg Eisenberg's company Islands, which is a messaging company. Maybe it was too ahead of its time. How have you sort of thought about consumer social over time, and where are we at now, and how are you viewing it as an investor?
Well, consumer social is probably one of those forever themes for me, just because community building and social is a big part of my interest area. And there are always quirky ideas at first, as and they're always an understanding of a user's psychology and like what they're trying to do. And that's what I love about social products is there's so many nuances, like ego analytics. How does someone feel better about themselves proactively from the product as a result of using the product, and all these other principles that I think are fascinating. They're also, of course, notoriously and increasingly hard to build just because the growth hacks that worked for the earlier versions of them are no longer either acceptable or legal. Number two is the walled gardens obviously are really powerful now, and Facebook has become very dominant in the way that it flexes its muscle in this space. And but I actually think that new mediums are a new opportunity. I'm looking at some social stuff in the AR space. I'm looking at audio social stuff. I'm also, thinking about what's kind of the next, personal human need that will be fulfilled by that technology.
Yeah, there's a great social product when it comes out. You can't imagine life before it, whether it was Twitter or not even Clubhouse. You can't imagine life before it, but just it's so elegant. It works so well. A couple spaces within that I've been excited about to look for is one is is there some version of a Discord for sports? Sports fans are just so engaged. They're willing to pay, as sort of the Athletic has shown. And is there an experience? I don't know if it's audio sort of play by play around the game or whatever it is, but it seems like that's something interesting. And then I've always wondered if there was something that could be done off of receipts or just new data sources in general, whether it's email or receipts that you could create that you could create an identity around, the things you support, the things
almost Venmo but in a different, more scaled context and more center of gravity.
Yeah, I think Venmo could have done a lot more with the feed, but also imagine Venmo if you also had a personal profile that was like your angel list profile, but it's like, here's the restaurant I support, or here's the causes I believe in, or. I
mean, one of the things I was excited about with Greg Eisenberg's with Islands is which he never really did as much, but we talked about it, was the constraints around the channels that people could join, these islands that people could join. And so making little rules, like if you're in a group, this group, you can only post photos, or this group, you can only post 5 words. Every message must be 5 words, or this group, you can only post your receipts, and you can automatically, connect it to your credit card and it just posts things from your receipts. But imagine an at-scale social experience with friends with these constraints, which, as we know, fuel creativity. I mean, that people love that stuff. Webbies were notorious. I think they had 5-word acceptance speeches, and it became kind of viral as a result. So I think there's some fun ideas there, in terms of new kind of rules for messaging.
New constraints for sure. The other thing I want to exist is basically quantifying fandom in a better way. So if I'm one of the first users of Stratechery, just a blog people are passionate about, or whatever it is, or this new band or this new whatever, I can sort of, claim my, get a collectible. It's claim my, it's almost like Foursquare for the internet in an interesting way.
It reminds me of the one, what was the SeaKeys business? Oh, Famous, where you could buy and own and it would be stolen away from you, but the identities of all these famous people and brands, which of course got shut down, but was an amazingly fun thing.
Yeah, went viral, got shut down. Yeah, there's definitely something there. Morgan DM'd me a question. Morgan, would you like to ask it?
Hey, Scott. I liked hearing Erik do a quick Shark Tank round with you, though, for all the ideas that he's been thinking about. So I don't want to interrupt that. But I will ask a question. So what's a product or company that has failed in the past that you think it was a timing thing And if it was to pop up today, it might have a chance.
I mean, preferred definitely is up there. I'm still looking for someone to do this. I'm biased on that one, though, of course. Let me think. It's a tough business model, but Circa, does everyone remember Circa, the news app? Beautifully designed product, Matt Galligan. The idea was you could follow a story. And think about it, actually. To this day, if you read a story in the news anywhere, you can't follow it and know what happens next, which is wild to me because news is like one of the most popular formats of media. And everyone always wants to know what happens next in any series, television show, or movie. So that was their simple insight that they had, was you could follow a story. They never really nailed it, and also never, for whatever reason, didn't catch on as widely. But that's another one. I think the timing was wrong. I think that there wasn't, I don't know, the graph wasn't there. They weren't as plugged in as they could have been now for social media. Just wasn't there yet. I'll keep thinking about it.
Did you have a take on HQ trivia or just sort of live video on the internet more broadly?
Well, from the Periscope days, I learned there was a very engaging format. And I talked with Russ at HQ, quite a bit about, the retention issue and some ideas around how do you have a vanity metric that survives the game? Because to me, I always like to say the dirty little secret about products like Instagram is you go in more to see who saw your content than to see other people's content. And so if you keep scrolling that out, it's really about accumulating this social value that you can then project to the world about something you're great at, or something you love or you're passionate about. And that's why these metrics matter. How many points you have, how many discoveries you've made, how many followers you have, how many likes we hate to admit it as humans, but it's true. This stuff these are those ego analytics I mentioned at the beginning. With HQ Trivia, the question was like, how can you become a bona fide superstar? And how could you also have that scale, like, your score? And how could everyone in their own little group of friends have a leaderboard? And it becomes this like, this, thing that it ultimately retains you over time. But any product I find that, starts all over again every single time. I guess Fortnite's probably an exception to that, although there's some things that accumulate there. But that was one thought I had around that experience.
Can you flesh out ego analytics a little bit more in terms of like what if you really understand that concept, what new ideas could come to mind? Or I've never heard that term. Can you just share more about it?
Yeah, so I think it's about one of my favorite product slogans is from Dave Marin, who once told me the devil's in the default. And I use that all the time because I think it's all that matters in product experiences and in helping a user succeed. And in the default experience, can you help the customer know how successful they're being in your product? And so that could mean anything from seeing your number of followers and likes or whatever else. On Behance, we would show people the graphs of their appreciations that they got in their projects and their view count, and those really drove engagement because people started feeling momentum and velocity. And it goes back to I remember a professor of mine at Harvard Business School, Teresa Amabile, did this huge study in organizations around creativity, and the whole study basically yields this insight that progress begets progress. That people have to feel like they're making progress in order to make more progress. And so as we have teams, and if we're not merchandising the progress our teams are making back to the team, they'll feel lost. They'll feel like they're in the back of a car with the windows blacked out and they don't know if they've made any movement along the journey. And so in some ways in the product, we have to make the customer feel like they're making progress. And that's, to me, like ego analytics is a tool to do that.
Yes, sorry. Hey, Scott. Thanks so much for doing this. My name is David. I run a coding bootcamp. So I'm curious your thoughts on what the future of, is there anything past the resume, past the portfolio, past the GitHub that, better connects, people who with skills to employers?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'm really excited about is the power of attribution in creativity, and it extends itself to development as well. I mean, it's pretty amazing that we can't go to any website and see hidden in the code exactly who did what. I mean, think about what that would do for developers' careers. If you go to any website and see exactly who did what for that technology, You can do it in a movie. If you're watching a movie, the credits will tell you who the first grip and the second grip and every single person who was involved with the movie gets attribution and therefore opportunity in their careers based on how well the movie performed. And we don't have that yet for any digital creations. And so I think about that a lot from both the developer
Well, I'm
and
about to go register a
side.
domain like devcreditroll.com or something.
There you go.
That's an amazing idea. I never thought about it, that my resume is a bunch
It's
of
your
lines.
work.
It's not a portfolio that I can just say, hey, I did,
Right. And you can get a plugin that exposes that information to every website and digital experience you ever encounter. And in one fell swoop, you could have full attribution of every designer and developer on the planet. Everyone would insert in the code, and you'd have career meritocracy because maybe people would find.
That would be the most viral thing, because I'm sure every developer, if some like NPM or you use the package managers, and then you're absolutely right, because 90% of developers aren't open source developers, right? Just I'm sure like 90% of designers don't get their name in the exit date or something.
Which
right?
is that's just like a cultural thing, because there's no reason for that not to be the case. I mean, one thing we just did in Photoshop 2 weeks ago is we launched this new thing called the Content Authenticity Initiative, which one purpose of it is to help people know, if a piece of content was edited. So there's like a sort of a fake media play there of helping, people know what they can trust. But then the other part of it was actually just fostering attribution in work, because essentially we can make it so that anyone who does anything in one of our tools, like Photoshop, can have that kind of work attributed back to them for career opportunities. So, I think that there's definitely inroads here that we could make. I think it would be a big deal.
Awesome. That's it.
Why haven't you incubated this company, Scott?
Oh, it's on my list. Believe me, I have a very long list of these crazy ideas.
Brian.
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking the reverse of Morgan's question would be interesting too. If you talked about some things that you're excited about, I'm curious to hear what are some things that you're bearish on, and is there a particular macro trend that will potentially pull the markets away from that current trend that's hot right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's put it this way. I think that we're over-indexing on video as it relates to the future of work. And I actually don't think the future of work has that much to do with video. So I'm probably in the minority on that, but it's a inefficient, judgmental, superficial, self-conscious format. And it's, and it's synchronous as opposed to asynchronous. And it's just, and it also drives us crazy by the end of the day. So I think there's going to be something greater than that. That's also going to be assisted by intelligence. You want to have the conversations with people that matter, and you also want to have conversations you didn't know you needed. You want some spontaneity as a service, and so I feel like those are some of the more interesting trends, in that space. I'm notoriously bearish on productivity tools. My view is that just like everyone focuses on the switching costs of productivity tools, and the fact that once you get someone in productivity tool that they won't want to leave. But you've seen the migration from Trello to the other Clubhouse to, other, it's like keeps going on. And I think what that's symbolic of is the fact that there's actually switching benefits as opposed to switching costs. When we take over a project as a program manager or project manager, it's like, oh, okay, I got to do some spring cleaning here. Let me go through our inventory of tickets and clean it up. Oh, and by the way, let's try this new tool. There's this notion of like novelty breeds utility and loyalty. When you feel attracted to a new system, when you're excited by it, you get like reinvigorated in the project. We switch our own tools occasionally, actually more than occasionally. So I really wonder if these productivity tools, if there's ever like really in the modern day, like a winner take all mindset. I mean, maybe Basecamp was really smart to remain a small, mostly private company that just distributes cash, to its owners, because maybe it shouldn't be a venture-backed business.
Vic.
So Scott, hey, thanks for joining us today. You talked about, you and Erik had both talked about this idea of all these, solo investors, small investors, boutique investors coming in or raising a round from them instead of kind of some of the bigger houses. And I've seen some of my friends do that as well. How does that work exactly? So let's say you raise from like 80 solo investors. How does the founder extract value from each of those investors? And how does an investor like you, when you're pooled with so many, how do you find space to give insight and input when there could be maybe 5 or 10 of you with similar superpowers, not the exact same. Can you talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, typically these rounds that I'm involved in, at least, are typically 7 to 12 investors. So it's not 80, and it's not like a big pool of very small investments. I think though that you asked a really good question about the way that an entrepreneur uses his or her investors and how you do it. I feel most used in a good way. When the teams are coming to me being like, I want 30 minutes to run through something specific, and they'll like tell me, and sometimes they'll even send me like a Notion document or a prototype to review and beforehand. And it's like the most power 30 to 60 minutes ever. And they'll ask pointed questions. I actually did this morning with the pitch team in Germany. They were thinking through something in their product roadmap, and they came like a week ago. Christian emailed me. He's like, "This is a specific thing I want your insight on." And I got on, and on the dot, they were the key team was there, and we like ran through it. So that that's a good feeling, because I feel like I can add value, and they know exactly what I'm useful for. And I think they'll also ask their investors, like, how do you help your teams? Like, how are you most helpful? And it's good, to have like a specific list to give of things you can do. So I think that's part of it, is asking the right questions up front, being very descriptive, et cetera. And as an investor, it's good to like manage expectations and tell your team, like, these are the few things I'm going to be interested in. Like when I talk to these data science type products, some of which I'm an investor in, I'm like, listen, I'm never going to help you on the data science side of this. So like, I'm going to hurt you if you ask me those questions. I'm really going to give you the bad answers. But, these are the things that I think I can do. Clarity helps.
Maybe including here, Scott, just looking towards the future. I know one thing you're thinking a lot about is the future of creativity. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's another interesting space these days. Both in the venture world, there are a lot of cool new companies. And again, I'm obviously biased because I have seen I've just been part of the Adobe DNA for a while. But first of all, every new medium falls flat unless it's filled with incredible, interactive, unbelievable creativity. The web didn't take off until that was there. Mobile didn't take off until that was there. And the same thing will be for the world of augmented reality, and to some extent virtual reality. Like, you need to outfit creatives to contribute and do that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in that space that I'm really excited about. I also think that the days of desktop software, there you're like kind of imprisoned to a desktop system and files is also old. And so, that's why I focused with the teams on bringing Photoshop and now cloud documents. If you're publishing Photoshop documents to the cloud, you can pick up on iPad, and you can imagine that extends to other platforms and, other places where you'd want to do creativity over time. So I think that creativity will be a platform agnostic, services first, in the cloud experience that enables all kinds of collaboration and, integrations that we, can only fathom right now. It's really cool. And the other thing I would say about this whole creativity space is that what are humans going to do? We're kind of effed. Everything's going to be replaced by AI. Every job is essentially at risk to some extent. And I think humans are going to have to do the things that only humans can do. And chief among them is to express yourself visually, to be creative and stand out at work, to be creative and stand out on social, to be a content creator. And so creativity tools are suddenly in vogue. The top of our funnel is so different now than it was 10 years ago at Adobe. It's unbelievable. Like, people are just coming in from everywhere. And of course, we need new tools and new experiences, new interfaces for sure, to accommodate these people, because products like After Effects are freaking hard. There's steep learning curves for a lot of these products. So that's exciting. I think that's like one of the biggest opportunities. I think there will be a lot of companies that win, in that space.
And then last one, just because it's on path. Sharos, do you want to ask?
Sure. Hey, how are we going to creatively collaborate in this remote world? I'm having such a hard time not being able to whiteboard.
Yeah, no, the good news is there's like 1 million companies thinking about it right now. The bad news is that they're not there yet, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm an optimist on this front. I feel like, the constraints we're living under right now are going to fuel so many creative solutions to this that we would never have had otherwise. I think that we're missing the forest for the trees by being in Zoom all day. There's different places we need to be and be doing. So, you're nodding your head. I think we agree on that. I'm with you. And I'm looking.
As you think about the downsides of your ego analytics framework, right? Addiction, humans becoming zombies. Do you see a world where tech embraces consumer products that have different ways of creating value in a way that makes a human whole again, or just something other than addiction?
I feel like we need to use some of the same tools that hurt us to help us. I mean, one great example is Apple's, new kind of timing technologies. And and when you start to see your screen time, then you start to reduce it but that's ego analytics playing. It's the same tool. It's just using it to train good behavior as opposed to entice bad behavior. So, I feel like we're governed by short-term rewards. We have dopamine, whether we like it or not, and I just hope that as designers of experiences, we can leverage those reflexes for good. And,
have you seen anything yet that you're excited about that's maybe in the early stages?
On that front?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I've seen, almost all the designers I know are actually thinking about this right now. And they're thinking about how you can reduce cognitive load, how you can, even when I talk to, friends at these big social platforms that are the most guilty of this, they are asking the right questions. They're like, well, what if we remove the like? What would happen? Let's run a test and let's see. What if we, hid this by default as opposed to show it? And would that change behavior, and how would it change behavior? So I think people are awoken to it. They're just not, we haven't cracked it yet. And listen, practically speaking, it's hard. Companies are not going to change their product overnight in a way that craters their business. They're going to have to test their way into it, but they do want to, at least the ones that I talk to.
That's great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect place to wrap. In a second, I'm going to ask everyone to unmute your mics and give Scott a round of applause. Scott, thanks so much for.
Oh, this is awesome.
Here.
Erik, thanks for doing this.
Awesome.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.